Welcome to FXpert Trading, where I use time cycles, median lines, and other technical analysis to identify trade setups in the US stock markets as well as the FX markets. If you like the information contained within this video, be sure to subscribe for more. We are on the E-minis future chart. This is the 3-hour time frame. So far this cycle, and by this cycle I mean the beginning of this longer term blue time cycle, has been very good. As I mentioned in the video a couple of weeks ago, I sold a small position in puts with a long-term expiration here in March 1st, March 2nd, somewhere along those lines. And that was only a small position because we needed to confirm this cycle bottom. And how did I mention we would do that? With a higher trough on the next orange cycle here, which we got. I nailed this bottom as well, and because of the confirmation of the longer term cycle trough, I bought SPY calls as well as sold additional puts. I am now all out of those positions with the exception of the puts I sold over here. How did I confirm this trough was in? 2 ways. I have put the 8 FLD on, and again, this is the 3-hour chart. We got the cross and close above the 8 FLD on the 3-hour chart here prior to the market open. And at the market's open, that is when I bought those SPY calls as well as sold additional puts. In my last video, I mentioned I sold half of the SPY calls up here for about 110% profit, as well as closed those puts. And I'd be looking for a pullback over here on Monday or Tuesday where I would open. I said open more puts in that video. What I meant was sell more puts. I actually instead bought a slightly out of the money call spread with an expiration for Monday. Today, when the market, or by the time you see this video, yesterday, when the market gapped up, I closed it for about 50%, as well as the rest of those SPY calls for about 220%. All in all, this cycle has been very good. So what is the play now? There are 2 options. If this cycle, which I believe may have troughed, if this gives us a higher trough again, I may take a short-term expiration call spread slightly out of the money, same as I did here. But I'm starting to lean more towards being patient and just waiting for the next trough, which should come in roughly around, it could come in as early as the 29th, that would be fine. Or as late as February 2nd or 3rd, that would also be fine, but somewhere in this area. How am I going to confirm that trough? The same way I did over here. There are 2 very or reasonably reliable ways. Looking for a clear price action below the 8 FLD on the 3-hour chart, and then a cross and close above in the expected time frame. The other way is I'll go to the 1-hour chart for this. What you could have done by using the daily time cycles and just wait for a higher close, or a higher low after making lower lows. That helps to confirm that the old cycle has ended and the new cycle has begun. If we get that confirmation here, it will be another opportunity to go long. Should we expect the same amount of bullishness out of this cycle as we did the last or the one before it? That kind of depends. I've zoomed out a bit so we can compare cycles here. This is the 2nd orange cycle, and we will be going into the 3rd. In the 3rd orange cycle of the last blue cycle, we had very minimal upside. Part of the reason for that was we had almost no pullback for the prior orange cycle. There needs to be some corrective period. If we get a healthier pullback with, again, clear price action below before we cross above, we should then expect some healthier continuation. But if we get a lot of sideways action, the upside is more likely to be limited. So we can keep that same concept in mind here. If we get a healthy correction here, we will more likely get some healthy continuation. If we get some chop here, or it continues up and then gives us a very small pullback, that does not create ideal conditions for going long, because eventually the market does need to cool off. It does need to correct. And sometimes what can happen is this. When there is no correction, it just chops for a whole cycle before it decides to continue. And this can be difficult to trade. That said, I'll get into those conditions when we get closer to that time. As this new trough approaches, do I want to go short? Absolutely not. We're early in a blue cycle, which is a longer term cycle, which means there's a lot of bullish pressure, or there should be. We are now putting in higher high, higher low. Actually, this is not a higher high, but high, higher low, higher high. There's no reason to short. If you want to go short, you either need to start seeing some of these lows get taken out, or you need to wait until much further along in the blue cycle. We don't have either of those conditions right now, so you should absolutely not be looking to short any pullback. You should be looking for those pullbacks to identify potential troughs where you can go long and just go with the trend. While I crushed the SPX and SPY positions, we are now on the PG daily chart where I have to show some pain. I know there's a lot on this chart, it's very busy, but if we look at this median line set and the pink and longer term maroon time cycles, it appears the bottom is actually already in. I had mentioned I was looking for further downside here, and I bought short options, and when we closed above, I closed that position out for about a 40% loss. I then repopped after we found approximate resistance at this modified shift median line set, and then after earnings it gapped way up, and I took about a 90% loss on that. So between those two positions, I lost approximately about 1.3 positions. Fortunately, I made far more than that on the SPX and the SPY positions. So overall, in the recent time period, I've been pretty profitable in the US markets. Moving over to the FX markets, we are on the Euro USD 3-hour chart. And in my last video I mentioned I was looking to go short here. It started to work pretty well, but it appears the next orange cycle troughed early. That said, if we look at the longer time frame, I'm going to go to the daily chart here, and we look at the longer term cycles. We are late in this blue cycle and now late in this pink cycle as well, which is a much longer term cycle. We should be expecting more downside. So despite the pie I took here, I will be using the 4-hour chart and the 50 SMA to look for additional shorts. If we take the drawing tools off and we just look at the 4-hour 50 SMA, we can see for shorting purposes, it generally provides good resistance, and if we come above, going below is generally a good shorting opportunity. This would have been stopped out here, but we had it here, above to below, good opportunity. Resistance, above to below, good opportunity. Resistance, resistance or above to below, resistance. We have resistance a little bit above and then below, and we just did the same thing. So I will be using this in combination with, now we're on the 1-hour chart, the shorter time frames, to look for another potential short. This lower time frame trough, it's about 1 day. It's difficult to judge, but this may be the trough right here, in which case this cycle has possibly already turned bearish because we've broken below that. What I'd like to see is a more certain trough and a break below that before I will put on a short position using, again, the 4-hour, and my stop will probably go somewhere up here looking for continuation to the downside. I talked about these median lines in the last video, so if you'd like to see how I plan to set targets, you can go watch the last video for that. We are now on the USDCAD 3-hour chart, and as I mentioned in the last video, I was going long with the 3-hour cross and close above the 8 FLD. While initially the position went very hard and strong against me, it has turned around. I originally had another median line set on here, a standard median line set, which looked less accurate than this does now. However, I did not take the trade based on these median lines. I only use those to show another potential way to enter would be finding a trough that kind of lines up with general or approximate support at the lower warning line. It's not always a good idea to wait for that. You don't always get that, and if you do, you need to go to a lower time frame like the 15-minute chart. And even then, I don't use the FLD on that time frame, but even then, if you did enter here after you bounced in the expected trough zone, you would have been stopped out for 1. And then if you got back in after this big 15-minute close, well, you're almost right up where we are with our 3-hour entry, except you would have already had 1 stop. So my preference, because you don't have to be at your computer all the time, is to use the 3-hour chart. I only take the lower time frame entries if I just happen to be at my computer at the right time. I put the 8 FLD on there, and so again, you can see this was the cross and close above, and that is when I entered. The expected continuation to the upside lines up with what is currently going on in the DXY right now, as well as another chart I talked about in the last video, the USDCHF. I'm expecting a trough somewhere in this area. It may have already come in, and depending on what's going on with the USDCAD at the time of the cross and close above the 8 FLD here, I may or may not enter this trade. If the USDCAD is working very well, I will probably enter this trade. If for some reason the USDCAD kind of turns around in what appears to be a concerning way with a lot of strength or very quickly, and we get the cross and close above here, then I won't want to be overexposed to the US dollar. However, for the time being, USDCAD looks as if it's doing pretty well. The other position is the EURJPY. I talked about this in the last video that I entered this late because I was traveling and I entered as soon as I got home, but I entered here, stop here. I have the whole thing set basically targeting this median line here for about a 2.24. Had I targeted just the 2-to-1, I would have gotten it already, but that's okay. We have now potentially bottomed in this orange cycle trough here. If that is the case, and this does go here, which we may get this in the next hour and 20 minutes if we close above, I will move this stop up to here. It will be slightly in the money, and then I will open a new position. The target for this position will remain the same. The target for the new position will be, depending on the size of the stop, half at 2-to-1, half at this median line here. I will not be targeting this median line. The longer term median line is below the shorter term median line, and I'm only targeting at that point the longer term median line. Could it go above? Sure. Could it also find resistance there and then start to put in a larger correction? Absolutely. So I will take the closer of the two targets in this case. As I mentioned on the ES chart as well as the USDCAD chart, you could go to a lower time frame, whether it's the 1 hour or the 15-minute. I don't use the FLD on the, sometimes I use it on the 1 hour chart, but below that I do not use the FLD anymore. I use SMAs instead. What you could do is look for a higher trough in this daily cycle, which should confirm that the bottom is in. Because we're putting in, where does it begin? Here, lower low, right? Here's the last high, here's the first lower low, which means this is a lower high. So high, lower low, lower high, lower low. Then all of a sudden, if we put in a higher low, that's a good indication the momentum, the negative momentum from this cycle has ended, and the bullish or positive momentum from this cycle has begun. So to recap the potential trade setups that I'm looking at in the near future, it's going to be the USDCHF, looking for a cross and close above the 8 FLD on the 3 hour time frame, and a higher trough on the orange cycle using the indications that I talked about with the daily cycles as well as the 8 FLD on the 3 hour time frame. As always, thank you for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe for more.